Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Pitt Season 2 Episode 3. It is 9 a.m. On the clock and this is a Patreon sponsor review, so thank you very much to Alison for making the pick. And spoilers, of course, as always, for the episode. So, I think what stuck out to me the most about this episode is how multiple plots seem to feed into kind of exploring the fact that we opened this season with Robbie on a motorbike. Despite what he says in this episode, where he says he does always wear a helmet, I don't think he was wearing a helmet back in the start of the season, which shows that he's being a little reckless, perhaps. And then there's the whole other subplot, because obviously that one comes from a couple that were in a motorcycle crash of some kind. The motorcyclist himself is basically just DOA, his brain's hanging out when they look at it. But then the other plot, which is him just treating this older lady with a burn on her leg, she happens to be Jewish, and there's a whole lot of things to go into with that. But the end of that plot is that when she finds out he's going on a sabbatical on a motorbike, she basically just starts making fun of him, or not even making fun of him, that's not even the right term, chastising him, telling him off for being a middle-aged man who's going out on a motorbike and how stupid that is, and calls him out for his midlife crisis, which does lead to a funny little moment where he repeats that in front of Dana, and Dana sort of smirks and says no comment. So that part of that obviously was a very entertaining exchange. The rest of the plot with that lady, of course, got a lot more serious because it turns out she was a survivor of the synagogue attack from 2018, which, not that I had that year like in my chamber, like, oh, I didn't, like, when she said the name of the synagogue, it didn't immediately click because I would never have remembered that, but I do remember news of an incident happening, so it became clear what they were talking about as they were talking about it, and I just did a quick fact check after I finished just to double check that it was what I thought it was. And of course that happens to be in the area where this hospital's set. So it makes a lot of sense to kind of call on this, and obviously the show does like to touch on a lot of various world issues that are going on. Even this topic broadly was covered last season, and then the entire incident that happened towards the end of the season. This was a little bit more where once she noticed that Robbie's name was Jewish, she brings that up. She clearly wants to talk about that and kind of bond with him over it. And she gets emotional a couple times in different ways, talking about, because her whole thing is that she dropped her big urn of hot tea or whatever it was. Forgive me, I don't remember the name they used to call it. It was a name I'd never heard before, but that's effectively what she's talking about. And she spilled that on her leg. But the sort of dark side of this is that the reason why she spilled it is because firecrackers and things that are going on for 4th of July gave her a fright, or at least that's the implication. The implication is that it was making her have memories of that day, of hearing gunshots and the fireworks and the firecrackers kind of bringing those memories back. So that was kind of a nice little emotional sequence, and then kind of in a similar thread when she's left alone with Perla, she asks about her being Muslim, and then talks, and I wasn't sure where it was going to go with that, but then she started talking about how it was the local Muslims who kind of helped in the aftermath of the incident and helped even pay for funerals and things like that. So even that ended up being like a very kind of sweet little moment. This very vulnerable lady, which is partly why it was so funny when she went into like tough mother mode with Robbie about the motorbike stuff, because it felt like such a pivot from like how vulnerable and upset and clearly touching like all those scenes were to pivoting immediately to, oh, you stupid man, what are you doing? You're supposed to know better than that. This is sad. You're a 50-year-old man. Why are you doing this? Don't be an idiot. That was entertaining because of this, in part because of how much of a shift it was from her previous scenes, and it showed that she herself has layers, and it also gives you a glimpse of like, oh, this is who she is when it's not about like the trauma that she's went through. So yeah, I mean, yeah, honestly, no real complaints on that plot line. And then the other plot line, which fed into it a little bit with the motorbike stuff, it was less to do with that. I mean, that was like a little footnote, honestly, more than anything. Whereas the rest of it was more about this idea of, there was kind of like a sort of double turn in this plot line, where at first it was the husband who was in serious condition, he might be paralyzed, the wife's freaking out, she's blaming herself for the fights they were having and the marriage troubles they were going through, and it led to this accident. But then he seems like he's going to be okay at a certain point. It turns out that he doesn't have internal injuries causing paralysis. It's actually something, a condition he's got to do with potassium leaving, or getting into his cells or something like that. And as a result, this is actually something that's flaring up as he's getting older, but it's something that he's always perhaps had. And that's kind of what's led to the accident. And then, actually, even before we get to that point, so the turn I'm talking about is that she ends up in the one that might be in more serious danger once she collapses and she's got like a spleen injury and she has to go to surgery, right? And you've got the mirroring of the fact that she makes this big heartfelt, it's my fault, this is all on me, when he looked like he was in the worst for it. But then when he's like awake and he's getting Dana to record a message on his phone, he's the one saying, this is all my fault, this was on me, I did this to us. So both sides of the marriage are feeling this like wave of guilt, and they both blame themselves, and it feels like there's hope for their marriage because they both feel like this. So there's a nice sentiment to that part of it. I will say I wasn't sure where this was going in the middle, because they do a whole thing where they reveal the results that kind of point to this condition that's not as serious as everything else that it could be, and it's something treatable and he'll be fine, like he'll regain power in his legs and arms and so on. And the wife gets this news, and she's so relieved, and she's hugging them. She's hugging Dr. Al and all the rest of it. And then he kind of like crashes and needs like, resuscitation. They have to like start doing compressions and whatnot. And she's like freaking out. And I thought, oh geez, is this going to be like this like warning, this like cautionary tale of like giving good news too soon or letting the loved ones be too kind of up to date? Because this turn, like they just gave her hope that this was all okay and it might all just be ripped away. Now it didn't actually go that route. In fact, they were able to bring him back very quickly. Like, he responded after like one go round, and it was like, hey, it doesn't get any better than this. So that was the best sign possible for this to be okay. But there was just a scare of like, oh, they've given her good news and it might all just evaporate in seconds, and it didn't. But like it felt like it could go that way in the moment. So yeah, I mean, that was very much the A plot of the episode, if I was to call anything the A plot. It's always tough with these episodes of The Pit to say which thing's the most prominent story sometimes versus another. But I think this is the one that, at least in the first half, got the lion's share of the screen time and the drama and just kind of the general sort of excitement of, oh, they're trying to work on someone and all this stuff's going on. So we had that. Now, another big plot that we kind of mostly wrap up in this episode is the little girl and the waiting for the father who Santos believes is abusing his daughter. And I've talked at length this season and definitely last season about Santos jumping to conclusions and maybe needing to learn a lesson or be humbled in some way. And this episode in some ways is actually quite frustrating, because in theory this was the humbling, because she's wrong, right? And she almost causes a massive like fight in the ER when the dad shows up, because I mean, not that she like provokes him necessarily, she's like going fairly by the book, asking questions like she should, with the ginger social worker whose name is Dylan. Of course his name is Dylan. Of course he's got an Irish sounding name. But they're like, but even them broaching these questions and him getting angry at the clear insinuations that they're obviously alluding to, it almost causes this big fight. And it's just like a fairy godmother. Dana comes running in at the last second with some results and says, oh, it's this. And Santos looks at it and has to admit, oh, it's not what we thought it was. It's this thing. Now, it turns out that the kid's got a condition that makes her bruise much easier than most kids, right? It's actually, and it's why her blood or urine is looking the way it is. And it's why she's got so many bruises, is because literally she's just, tapped, and then, and they can put her on some steroids and stuff. Apparently that's going to do the trick. And I don't know if she'll need treatment forever or if it's more just like a childhood thing, but regardless, they figure it out and it's nothing to do with abuse. So it's like, okay, Santos was wrong, and it's probably good that she was wrong, and it's good that she like saw the fight she was about to cause, and then someone came running in and stopped it, and everything kind of calmed down a little bit from that point on. It seems like the dad isn't like a horrible monster, maybe a slight asshole because he's temporizes quite quickly in the hospital, but at the same time he's also been accused of something very, very bad that he knows he's not done. you kind of get why the emotions flare up and why it gets confrontational in the moment. And from a TV writing perspective, in like a cynical way, it's also very convenient because it makes it look more and more like he's guilty of the thing that's been said because he's getting angry. So the fact that they have the security guard come over, it feels like they're kind of, it's all going in this direction until Dana comes in. But in the aftermath, in 2020 hindsight, you can clearly see, oh, he's upset because he's been accused of this thing that he's not done. And it's actually kind of understandable that he gets upset when he's accused of this. So the reason why I'm saying it's not quite the humbling that perhaps, or why I think maybe she needs a bit more humbling, or maybe needs to show later on that she's learned something from this, is there's a sequence later on where she's sitting doing paperwork and the dad and the girlfriend start having a fight in front of her, and she's seeing the whole thing. She's basically got a front row seat to this fight that plays out. She's never involved in it, she's just a witness. But we keep cutting back to her reaction as, you know, the dad basically tries to apologize to the girlfriend, because during the heated moments earlier on, he yelled at her for, you know, letting his daughter get hurt and like, oh, this looks bad, you know. And then he was also mad in the moment for her suggesting something that made him look like he was being abusive, because she's told the doctors, oh yeah, they roughhouse, they wrestled together. And he took that as, you tried to tell them I was doing horrible things. And emotions got high, right? So in this aftermath, and we've already had a scene, I think, where Santos is explaining the treatment that needs to be happened. The mum's on the phone listening to it all as well. And it seems like, okay, they're going through all these steps. This is what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. So aftermath of all this, the dad goes over to the girlfriend and tries to apologize for anything that he said, right? He's like, you know, explaining that he was, you know, obviously feeling angry, feeling in shock of what was been said and whatever. And the girlfriend doesn't really want to hear it. She gets pissed, and feels like she was being accused of being the one who was abusing someone in front of everyone, because they were yelling, like everyone around them in the ER was hearing all this. And he's like, yeah, but you were basically accusing me of that. So weirdly, I was oddly siding a little bit more with the dad in this breakup scene than I was the girlfriend. No, I'm not really going to stake a flag on either side, but I felt like he had a bit of a point there. But you know, they basically break up. Their voices raise a little bit, and it kept cutting over to Santos, and that's the important part here. Is that Santos looked like she was enjoying the show. Like she was satisfied seeing this fall apart. And I honestly don't know how to read it, if like she's happy this has happened because she thinks they're both bad, or she still thinks the dad's a problem, or she thinks the girlfriend's more a problem. I actually don't really know. But she looked very amused with herself as she was seeing this breakup. You know, there's a little smirk in her face. I don't know. I was having trouble reading this because I don't really know what... Because honestly, what I thought was going to happen in the scene, that would have been the more kind of obvious path of Santos has had growth throughout this storyline, that she's learned something from what's happened. I kind of expected her to get involved. I kind of expected her to like stand up and say, hey, look, this is partly on me. I suspected something, or not even maybe that much. Maybe just something as simple as, hey, tensions are high. It's okay that we all feel a lot of things, you know, over like the safety of the girl and so on. Like, you know, try and mediate a little bit and maybe try and repair some damage that she might have inadvertently kind of nurtured in the first place. Right? Now, maybe this dad and the girlfriend, you know, aren't in a healthy relationship. Maybe it was all leading to doom anyway. That's very possible. But we don't really see enough of them or know enough about them like to even assess that in any great way, shape, or form. So I think my obvious expectation was Santos gets involved and maybe even fails, but tries to kind of mediate their emotions a little bit, is almost like a personal kind of make good of like where she was pushing everything earlier, where she had already made up her mind the dad was guilty. Every time she talked to Dylan, the social worker, even earlier in this same episode, they reiterate that, where they're waiting for him, and she's like, yeah, if he shows, you know, like she clearly like was ready to form the witch hunt, right? She's jumping to these conclusions, and in this case, the conclusion was absolutely wrong. So I feel like her just enjoying their breakup scene felt very unlikable to me, because it felt like she was, I don't know, it felt like instead of having learned something, or even if she didn't intervene, at least look guilty, at least feel a little uncomfortable. But she seemed to be smirking, and that felt like, oh, I don't know how much you've learned from this. It feels a little, I don't know, mean-spirited to me. So I don't know, Santos is in a really weird place right now where, like, in theory, this should have been the lesson this episode. Like, this big fight that was almost about to happen, Dana coming in to save the day at the last second, and her realizing she was wrong and it wasn't going down the path that she thought it was. And there's even a little moment, actually, where she's talking to Whittaker, where Whittaker's like, hey, what happened with the girl? And she's like, oh, she's got this condition. And she's like, and Whittaker's like, oh, well, that's, it's better than the alternative, a pretty fair, statement to make, that, hey, this, her having this condition is treatable, and it's much better than the horrible acts that could have been the cause of it instead. And Santos just kind of, in a weird defeated way, says, yeah, yeah, sure, or yeah, I guess. I can't remember the exact phrasing, like the exact way she phrased it, but it was just kind of like, yeah, you're right. But it almost with like a, I don't want to say she was disappointed. I think that's too extreme to say that she was disappointed that she didn't have a villain to go after. But it was skirting the line almost with the way she reacted to that. And then the way she seemed to enjoy the breakup scene afterwards, or before that. I don't remember what the order was of those two sequences, but very curious to see what they're planning with more Santos this season, because it feels like she's the one who has, in many ways, the most like weight, or the most kind of build up behind her character right now, in terms of like room for growth and room for things. Obviously, yeah, all the characters have something going on. They all have something they're going through, or things to develop, some deeper than others, but this one feels particularly potent. So curious to see where they go with her as we go through the rest of the season. Elsewhere, there's definitely a lot of characters who were more sidelined this episode, who were just kind of around. Like Samira, like, she's there for some of the operating scenes. She reacts to a bit more of Javadi and the other guy, whose name I've still not learned, being competitive. And that's just one little quick sequence that it's almost like just reminding you this is going on. It's not really got much advancement in this episode. I did appreciate, though, at the end of that scene, the patient's like, wait, what was I supposed to understand any of this quick medical textbook jargon you were just throwing out at each other repeatedly? Because they were supposed to be explaining this in part to the patient, as well as just answering Samira's question as a kind of, teaching moment. So they failed completely to actually explain anything to the patient. So it's, again, maybe the start of some lessons forming there for them about the fact that treating the patient is more important than their medical dick measuring contest that they're having. So yeah, there was that. Like Whittaker was in and out, he mainly just treating the alcoholic guy who's in more pain. They finished the draining, but his tooth still bothering him. So that was that. I think the other plots to mention, I think Cassie Mackay, she has an interesting couple of things going on in this episode. One is kind of a weird follow-up to, remember when she said she needed to get laid a couple of episodes ago? That was like a little point they made with her. Interestingly, she's getting a fair bit of attention this episode, where there's an older guy who is kind of just being charming and trying to flirt, and it's very harmless, but he's kind of saying, oh, you've got pretty eyes, and later on tries to do a little twirl with her to dance. And both times he does this, there's this other guy, this younger guy, sitting in another hospital bed, who kind of like says, yeah, he's right, you are beautiful, or save a dance for me, doctor. So it's more of a sort of running thing. I mean, obviously the older guy, I don't foresee a romantic future there. If anything, I could see him suddenly dying and it being really sad, because he was being flirtatious before, so it feels like, we got a little bit of personality before he died. Not that I think he's definitely going to die, but I could see that. The younger guy, maybe she'll make a date with the younger guy who's on the other bed. But it does kind of feel like she was like, oh, I need to get laid soon, a couple of episodes ago, and then this episode she's like, oh my god, what is with today? Why is there so many men trying to flirt with me while I'm doing my work? She's uncomfortable, but not in like a No, no, uncomfortable sounds too strong though. It feels more just kind of like, oh, she feels shy. That's a better word for it. She feels a little bit shy in the moment. It feels like she's like, wait, what's in the water today? Why am I getting so much attention? I think uncomfortable sounds too strong because it sounds a bit more like someone is like coming on too strong and being uncomfortable in that way, where it's a bit more of a negative, I suppose. But anyway, but the other thing with her, though, is following up with the guy who was clearly having some brain troubles last episode, who was forgetting things. His ex-wife shows up because she was still the emergency contact. So she's remarried, but she was on his sheet, so she's the one that's shown up. And she's still, upset to hear that he's going through what he's going through. And we get his scan back, and it turns out there was a growth of some kind in the front of his brain, and it could be a tumor, right? I will not do my Arnold, it's not a tumor impression. It might be a tumor. But it could be a cyst, it could be a number of things she listed like 5 different things. I'm not a doctor, but it could be any number of these things, but certainly this is what's affecting his brain. And she's explaining this to him with the ex-wife in the room, and the ex-wife and him start kind of catching up, and he's like, oh, I'm happy you're with someone, and don't worry about me, I'm a survivor. And it's got that kind of awkward, like, hey, we still obviously care about each other to some extent, even though we split up and you've moved on to a new relationship and so on. I think the big scene of this for me, though, and this is actually the one that makes Cassie cry a little bit by the end of the scene, she looks a bit teary-eyed, is that the ex-wife comes out to her when she's leaving and asks about this growth in his brain, and says, it's changing his personality, and his temper's suddenly shifting. And we saw that last episode. We saw that firsthand. This is a good example of them showing something rather than just telling us it. We got an example of this before they explained it to us. And she says that, hey, when we were married, he changed, by the end. It's why we kind of ended up splitting up, is that he did start having more of a temper. He'd get into fights with strangers. He would do this, and this. And she says, hey, I know you've only just detected it now, and the it's getting more severe, so he's like collapsing and things like that. But is it possible that he's had this for a long time and it was already affecting his personality and his behavior, years ago? And Mackay says it's possible that it was, yeah. Like, it might very well be something that was changing his behavior while they were still married. Which makes the ex-wife very upset, and she doesn't say any what I'm about to say, but it's very sad because there's this kind of implication of, oh, the reason why I decided that it wasn't working anymore and maybe starting not to like who he was is because of a medical condition that wasn't his fault. And I, said, oh, he's just turned into an asshole, I'm leaving him, and she's went off to be with someone else, and now because she's still the one on his medical contact sheet, right? She's still his emergency contact. He clearly doesn't have anyone else that's replaced her. He's kind of on his own now. And she left him, went and found a new husband, a new marriage, a new life. And it was something that was not his fault. And there's this sadness of, not only is he going through this now, he was actually going through this while we were still married, and we just didn't know it yet. And how different things would have been if they just happened to somehow find out. Maybe he had to come in for some other reason, get it scanned, and they find it, whatever the case may be. But there's kind of this weird, like, almost like sudden backdated guilt that kind of comes along with it. And it's just kind of sad, and it's not her fault. Like, she's not a villain for making the choices she made. At the time, she made choices based on reasonable information that she had and experiences that she was having. But it's clearly really sad, and she ends the scene by asking that she remain his emergency contact. Like, no one's else going to be here for him. I'll still be here in this capacity. I can still do that for him. And, Cassie says, yeah, and she looks like she's tearing up. It's a really, really, like, heartwarming, sad sequence of, like, the end of the marriage they had wasn't this just typical, like, breakup. At least maybe it seemed that way at first, but in hindsight, it wasn't that. And it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that. And it's probably my favorite scene of the episode, actually, because I didn't expect this plot to take me to this kind of interesting thought, like, process. It was a fine plot. It was doing okay beforehand, but I wasn't really caring that much when the ex-wife showed up. I got the key drama of, like, being kind of awkward, but he's not got anyone else, so she's going to still do this for him. And that's sweet enough in its own right. But I think this particular aspect of it, of this oh, this might be what actually ended our marriage in the first place, and it's not really his fault, and now he doesn't have anyone. Like that side of it, I think, was a real kind of more gradual gut punch. It wasn't a quick gut punch. It was a very kind of, oh, the fist is already in my gut, and I didn't realize it was there already, but you've kind of snuck it in. This is a weird analogy that I'm going with here, but I don't know. I was impressed with that development. I think it's the most interesting thing this particular episode does. So full points for that. As far as anything else goes, I mean, who else do we have that I've not talked about? I mean, King's around for a couple of the various things. Langdon's got a minor subplot where he's helping a kid who's got like beads stuck up his nose. He was wanting to fire them out of his nose, but he got them stuck, so they're having to go up with some fancy air bubble things to pop them out. And it's mostly just a pleasant little sequence where, you know, him and Donnie are being good with the kid, and the dad's kind of like being friendly with them. It's a very pleasant plot, you know, mixed in with all these other sad or more dramatic tragedy plots that we're getting throughout the episode. But that was there as well. Not really too much to say on it, but you know, it was fine. And it was kind of the different type of like having to take a kid to the hospital for something stupid. And the funny thing is that even as much as the plot with the girl who Santos thought was being abused turned into a very serious plot, fundamentally it started off with something stupid. She ran up the stairs and hit her chin. Like, you know, this was just, you know, silly kid stuff. It just so happened that she had a condition that they've discovered as a result of it. But this kid, no, he stuck stuff up his nose, and it needs to be fixed. You know, hell, we had a woman with a fork stuck up her nose last season. Joe, we've not had yet, right? Because the joke thing that people always talk about with doctors and ERs is this idea of how many people have had something stuck up their less desired places. And I'm actually a little amazed that we've made it into this chunk of season 2 and we've still not done that yet. But it's definitely going to come. I guarantee you, someone's going to have something up their ass, or a woman will have something stuck up the front at some point. We're going to do that. It'll be a comedy subplot. I'm sure of it at some point, right? Not that we're needing it right now. You know, we had the constant erection last time. This time we got beads up the nose. We've got plenty of silly medical conditions to deal with, but it's definitely happening at some point. So there's that. And, you know, again, we check in with a couple things. Like the guy who was dead dirty. We see more of the new nurse, Emma, like giving him like an IV or whatever. And it's a quick little sequence. Again, there's a lot of little sprinklings of things to remember. I've not mentioned Dr. Al too much. There is a little bit more of them both trying to give different commands early on. It's not as heavy as it was the last 2 episodes, though. They probably kind of rightly felt that, oh, we've laid that on really thick last time. Let's hold back a little bit and we'll, you know, it's still there, it's still ongoing, but it's not something that we focus on as much this episode. Which does leave me to explaining the cliffhanger at the end, which is maybe not the big tragedy of the season, perhaps, but certainly something that's going to spice things up in the next little bit of time. And that is that the closest other hospital is having to close its ER or something to that effect for the day due to, I don't even say what it is. Like, it could be anything from power failure or, I don't know, a blocked toilet, I think Robbie says as a joke. But all of their ambulance traffic, everyone who was going to go to that hospital is now coming to this hospital, including all of the regular people that would be coming to this hospital. So they're going to have double patients for the next little while. That is what they're going to be doing. So that'll maybe heighten things up a little bit in the next few episodes. Oh, and then the other subplot, which again, like, it's very easy to forget some of these smaller subplots. I forgot about the nun last week of all things. The nun with the gonorrhea face. But this episode, it was the end of last episode, actually. The cliffhanger was this guy coming in screaming on the ambulance. And here, he's taken in, he's still acting up, but they have to sedate him and they're going through whatever. And he ends up not being a big part of the episode, honestly. It's actually kind of wild that was the cliffhanger to episode 2's ending. And then here it was like, oh, it's like a background plot. In fact, more of the plot's more about the security guard that comes in after, who was like, hey, I was at campus, I'm campus security. He threw a chair at my head. That guy you've got in there, I'm going to wait here so I can give a statement to the police. And the ending of this turns out that he's like so hungry to complain about these young drug addicts that he has to deal with, and he's like all buddy with the police who show up, which they don't return it, for the record. They're very stoic and just kind of want to ask him the facts. But when they get the results back, it turns out that the guy has no drugs in his system, nothing. And what he does have, though, is taser marks on the back of his neck. So the police sort of turn and look at him as if, hey, it kind of feels like you're looking like more of the culprit here now at this point. So, yeah, maybe there'll be a follow-up to explain exactly what happened to this guy and to make him this kind of like yelling and whatnot. But I don't know. We'll find out next time, I guess. But that was the main thrust of it in this episode, was kind of this little double turn of this overeager security guard who it turns out is maybe more the problem here. And probably racist, given the race of him and the patient involved. So, anyway, that is episode 3 of The Pitt for the season. Yeah, definitely a more chill episode, perhaps. The last one was very funny. This one had a little bit of humor, but it wasn't laying it on as thick, for sure. But we've set up kind of where we're going to go next with some more bigger crisis stuff. Not that I think this is going to be the biggest crisis of the day, is them having to take in patients from another hospital. I'm sure there's going to, well, I say patients, it's not really patients from the other hospital, it's the new patients that would be going to the other hospital, to be precise. Is the ambulance traffic is all going to be coming to them. But anyway, that is my thoughts on episode 3 of The Pitt season 2. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, if you want to support everything, you do that over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or via YouTube membership. Thanks to everyone who already does. Check out MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. It's a good time over there. But thank you once again. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?